Are you a business owner or entrepreneur who's had great success in the business world, and now you want to launch a speaking career to share your message with the world? If that's you, then listen up. 25-year speaking industry veteran Brett Ridgway has released his latest special report, 3 key things entrepreneurs must master to build a profitable speaking business. To pick up your copy, go to brettridgway.com/freebie. Welcome to the Spotlight on Speaking show with Brett Ridgway, where you'll learn the keys to building a profitable speaking business from speaking industry pros. Each week, we interview a great guest who will share his or her speaking journey, identify what their keys to success have been, and highlight some critical mistakes they've made along the way that you'll want to avoid. Be sure to visit our website at spotlightonspeaking.com. And while you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, sit back, tune in, and get ready to meet this week's guest.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Spotlight on Speaking show with Brett Ridgway. I'm your host, and I'm excited to have as my guest today, Greg Wasserman. Greg lives a life fueled by curiosity, trust, love, fitness, and adventure. He follows the motto, life is about time and relationships, and you never know where a conversation today will take you in the future. He seems to have a superpower of connecting with people to foster growth and connections. He has over 15 years of experience as a successful revenue generator in advertising sales and partnerships, and he's experienced high success working with brands, agencies, and companies. His expertise also extends into the podcasting space, where he sold podcast ads, ran the operations for 3 listening platforms, and is currently the head of relationships at Castmagic, an AI platform that transforms conversations into content like magic for podcasters, coaches, speakers, marketers, sales teams, and more. He's a sought-after consultant, and he guides professionals in building themselves into brands. Welcome, Greg Wasserman, to the Spotlight on Speaking show.
Thanks for having me, Brett.
So we were talking a few weeks ago, and you've done a little bit of speaking, but I don't know a whole lot about your speaking background, Greg. So you work with a number of different companies over the year. When did you first either get pushed to the front of the stage or decide that you need to get up there yourself and share some of your expertise with the world?
It's been basically here with Castmagic, but the way I got into it was through the podcasting game. When you're running 3 podcast listening platforms, my job in that sense there was basically, how do I help podcasters grow their audience? They'd come to me and go like, look, you've got millions of users. How do we get those users to listen to our show? So I came to realize, all right, there's 3 ways to help grow your audience, grow your distribution, and monetize. And so through those conversations, you really start to listen to podcasts. You start learning podcasts and see the nuances and so forth. And then when I came here to Castmagic, I really kind of get thrusted into like doing the podcast circuit in this regard. So you get used to kind of talking. Everyone keeps asking me when I'm going to have my own podcast. I've enjoyed being on the guesting side of it and continuing to find what makes a good guest, what makes a good host, and the different uses there. But that's really been, so now I've been maybe 40 or so plus podcasts in less than a year, and just continue to grow from there. And then it's helped me then get on stage and start speaking at podcast events, start talking in that regards.
So what do you find the major differences are, Greg, between speaking at a live event versus doing it via a podcast or a virtual summit? Is there anything you tweak or do differently from one compared to the other?
Yeah, for me, the hardest thing is this Zoom kind of recording where it's like, all right, it's just you and I having a one-on-one conversation. And if I'm in front of a stage, whether it's Zoom once again, it's like you're missing the eye contact. You're like, all right, I'm going to look at this square, then look at this square, versus being up on stage and being able to walk and pace. Like as you can tell, as I sit here and move my hands, like I don't sit still. I want to take up space, and you really can't do that when you're sitting here in front of a virtual environment.
So do you typically have let's just call it a canned presentation, or do you research the audience and tweak in any way based on who's sitting in that seat?
Usually it's the latter. I usually like to go in and go like, all right, who am I speaking to? How can I make this relevant for them? You've got your overall talking points, your overall things that you want to talk about, but ultimately I want to connect with my audience, and the audience is not going to listen if I'm talking about podcasting and they're all health coaches that have nothing to do with podcasting. Then how do I make this relevant for them? I want to make them engaged, make them tune in, and it goes back to is what you said at the top, like life is about time and relationships. So how do I strengthen my relationship with the audience? The best way to do that is understand who they are.
So how do you go about best building rapport with a particular audience? Are you a Socratic technique type of guy asking questions? Are you getting them involved in interactive activities? So how do you build rapport with an audience so that your message hits home as well as you want it to hit?
Um, I'm more of a rhetorical kind of question person. So let me ask the question, not so much get the audience engaged in that regards. Um, Done it enough where it's like, all right, how to ask the question, maybe a few people raise, or like, oh, I see. It's like I'll look at it, I'll ask the rhetoric question, then pay attention to facial expressions. Go like, all right, based on the facial expressions, can they understand what I'm saying? Are they resonating? Am I seeing the thoughts? You can go like, all right, I can see exactly what they're doing, so I can continue to move on. If I miss the mark, then the facial expressions I'm getting are like, uh-oh, then you either have that wave of panic of like, where do I take it? Or you just know like, all right, I'll continue it on. I missed it, and you just continue to go from there.
So the speaking that you're doing these days obviously is primarily to sell a product. So as you're going through a presentation, Greg, how do you determine number one, if you're hitting the mark and you need to tweak anything? And is it always about just showing the tool, or is there, what if you're not able to show the tool? What do you do?
Yeah, good one. I guess to correct you, it's actually not to sell a tool. The whole platform I like talking about is content repurposing, but also from a podcast standpoint, how do I get podcasters to call themselves a brand and thinking about branding as opposed to just a medium? So it's more about mindset shift and monetization shifting, less about here's a product that does what I'm asking you to do. Um, and then what was the second part of the question? I apologize.
Oh, I'm not sure I'll even remember that now, Greg.
Right?
So,
But yeah,
I
so
mean,
it's more of just understanding who I'm speaking with, and regardless of who I'm speaking to, whether you're a life coach, whether you're a podcaster, whether you're a salesperson, the ultimate piece is there's so much value that comes from conversations, no different than the one we're having here, no different than any one of us that are on stage and speaking. In that case, it's a one conversation too many, but there's value in that conversation. So how do you understand what value are you trying to provide? But also how, in my case, from a speaking standpoint, can I get people to start changing their mindset? And that's really what I'm going for when I'm speaking, a mindset shift, taking the blinders off and gets you focus on what a bigger picture can look like.
so how do you determine if you've been successful at having that mindset shift?
For me, it's always audience engagement thereafter, either the questions that you're coming or someone comes up afterwards. Uh, my content lives on LinkedIn, so the greatest feeling I get is when someone connects with me on LinkedIn and goes like, "Hey, I saw you on stage," or whatever the case might be. That's usually my go-to. How do I continue to find reaction? How do I build an audience? And whether they sign up for a newsletter, whether they engage with me on social, or they come up to me after I'm on stage, those are big pieces.
So what calls to action have you tried from the platform, and what type of call to action has worked best for you?
Uh, Considering most of my content lives on LinkedIn, my call to action is usually follow me. As I say, and as you already quoted, life is about time and relationships. Like you have no clue where one conversation. So if you found what I have to say is interesting, relevant, resonated with you, like add me, connect with me. Let's have a conversation and we'll see where it takes us from there. And who knows where that conversation will go.
All right, so give me your maybe your three best tips for being successful as a speaker based on your experience in the game.
I would say content is king. So goes back to content repurposing. Like, am I always making sure brand Greg is out there? Whether it is repurposing podcasts that you're on, whether it's my thoughts that I have and being able to share that, letting people know these are the things that I like to talk about. And so I'm consistently daily posting content. And the more content I'm consistently posting, the more times people are able to see you, able to engage, therefore my audience is able to grow. And then you give a call to action. If you're looking to get more speaking engagements, it's like, great, hire me for this, or these are the things I talk about, or you're giving away that content for free. So the biggest thing for me is, I would say, consistently posting content, so that you've got an audience that knows, likes, and knows what you know, so they can come to you for getting another speaking engagement or whatever it is you're trying to offer.
So what specifically has worked best for you to find additional speaking engagements?
Conversations. Literally continuing to have conversations with people. The more conversations you have, the more people know that you are available, right? So I can go out there and try and cold email. I can try and work with a PR firm. Those are things that are available. For me, it's always just been like, let's continue to have conversations. And that way people know, this is what I'm offering. This is what I do. These are my services. If you know someone, you ask for a recommendation, you ask for a referral, keep me in mind. If it's an event, going like, hey, do you have an event coming up? So I guess my background being in revenue is always being able to think about, like, all right, how do you continue to move the conversation towards whatever your end goal is? Not a lot of people or speakers are thinking about that. They're like, oh, I talked to them, and so they should have me in a Rolodex. But the reality is now you've got to stay top of mind. So you've got to continue to have those conversations,
Yeah.
but make sure that they remember you.
I agree wholeheartedly that relationships, in my opinion, are your number one business asset. And if you're not nurturing those properly and providing valuable content, then you're wasting those relationships. So I want to dive some more into the whole area of content repurposing because it's critical. But before we do, let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsor.
Are you a business owner or entrepreneur who's had great success in the business world, and now you want to launch a speaking career to share your message with the world? If that's you, then listen up. 25-year speaking industry veteran Brett Ridgway has released his latest special report, 3 key things entrepreneurs must master to build a profitable speaking business. To pick up your copy, go to brettridgway.com/freebie.
All right, and we are back with the Spotlight on Speaking Show, and my guest for this episode is Greg Wasserman. So we were talking before the break, Greg, about the whole concept of content repurposing, and it's critical if you're a speaker who wants to build that brand. So what are some of the things that you see that speakers are most weak at in terms of taking advantage of the tools available to them to repurpose their content?
They think, I take one piece of content and I post it and then I'm done. And that's their form of repurposing. When in reality, there's so many different nuggets that come out of it. Can I turn that thought? Can I continue to fuel conversations I'm having to help let more people know about what it is that I talk about? So whether it's just taking, excuse me, my recording from stage, if it's the same thing I'm always saying, are there nuggets, are there handouts, are there things that I could take from that I could source and turn into social posts, whether it's a LinkedIn, Twitter thread, or Instagram post, and let people know these are the things that I'm always dropping knowledge. The other piece is you have a lot of thoughts. What you're on stage is a canned piece, but it came from years of experience, or you've siloed it down to something. Can you start breaking those pieces up and let more people know about all these little segments that you've got? I think that's the biggest piece that speakers can go ahead and take advantage of, is like, how do I let more people know? Not that I speak on these 5 topics, but feed me, give. So it goes to my thought of give to get. So if I continue to give content, give away information, so people know that this is what I talk about, it's going to allow them to connect with me so that they want me on stage going like, I love what you talk about. can you come and talk about that? If all I'm doing is like, hey, hire me because these are the 5 things I talk about, like, okay, cool. But that person who's going to hire you is probably following other people. And they're like, oh, I follow this person. I like what they have to say. It resonates. Let me bring them onto the stage. So you have to remember, we're all humans. We are following people on social. We're all engaging with newsletters and so forth. What are you doing to allow yourself those engagement moments? And repurposing really helps you do that, because that way you're working smarter and not harder.
So, in your opinion, what is the most overlooked possible use of repurposing a podcast episode such as this?
I post it and I forget about it. So it's basically I posted it once, please listen to my podcast, and then I've moved on to next week, please listen to that podcast. So in reality, you can seed this for the next 4 months of conversations that you had with, in your case, with a guest or me as a guest. So if I guest in people's podcasts, I've got 5, 7 already pre-designed LinkedIn posts that at any given time I can go ahead and post and talk about. For me, it's not go listen to my podcast episode with you, in this case, Brett, or anyone that's listening. It's not like trying to drive people to listen to that. It's a matter of, how do I get them to know me? And if they want to go listen to it, great. But at least I've given them information that they're able to walk away with. So if you're not giving them something and you're just trying to drive a person to spend 20 minutes listening to your recording, it's a losing situation. You are forcing me to give you time that I don't have, as opposed to letting me come to you with the time I have. So I can read your newsletter 3 minutes as opposed to a 20-minute, but you still engage with that person. There's still a conversation that's being had in an audience that's growing. So if you're thinking about that way, as opposed to you either hire me for speaking, you either listen to my podcast, those are win or lose scenarios, as opposed to how do you just continue to find ways to win.
So, aside from not repurposing a given podcast and using it more ways than one, what other typical mistakes are you seeing podcasters make in general that are hurting their efforts to build their platform?
Uh, they're not engaging with their audience. I really love breaking the fourth wall. And so breaking the fourth wall is a great way, because then it goes from a you and me conversation that people are listening to and becomes a conversation that people get to tune in. And so no different than when you're on stage, it's like, how do I bring the audience in? How do I speak to everyone out there and feel like I'm speaking to you and you're not just listening to me talk? So from a podcast standpoint, how do I make sure, like, hey, everyone, let's summarize what Greg just said and break it down so that people now are learning along with you as the host or learning with me as the guest, so that I've got those pieces of conversations that we can engage with.
All right, so one of my favorite questions I always ask my guest, Greg, is okay, time to bare your soul a little bit here and share maybe some speaking mistake you made along the way that left you red faced at the time, but there was a valuable lesson learned, and it would be something you would highly advise speakers not to do.
Um, I still get the jitters. I still get nervous. I call it, I black out in a sense on stage, where you're like, if you're on a panel, or if you're blinded by the light, you're like, hold on. I lose my train of thought a lot, and it's okay. Like, remembering like that panic that comes in when you lose your train of thought, no different than you and I. You asked me a question, I'm like, hold on, I answered the first part, I forgot what the second one is like, you feel bad, and like everyone else is like, how does he not remember that, right? But like, at the end of the day, I think COVID has really helped us become more human and going like, you don't have to be perfect. It is okay to remember that you can make mistakes, that no matter how well rehearsed you come into there, you may not have slept well. Your brain may be fogged. You may be battling a grieving situation, then you still have to put on a smile and go out there on stage. Like, be vulnerable, and it's okay. People accept that, because that allows you to even have a better connection with your audience. Because then they look at you not only as the expert that you are on stage, but as a human like them with something to offer.
Yeah, I've only tripped over my tongue 2 or 3 times today, so hey.
Exactly. It's natural.
All right, so I know I normally do talk about products on the podcast, but you got this pretty cool tool you're involved with called Castmagic now. So I want to give you a few minutes to tell people a little bit more about what it is and what it can do for speakers who are doing their own podcast or recording videos in some way. So floor is yours.
Well, Castmagic takes any conversation and turns it into content for you. It goes back to the repurposing piece for me. And it's not just a podcast. So whether you are a speaker, you're probably, and this is how the product was built. Castmagic was originally built for podcasters. We quickly learned, like speakers, you do more. Your job isn't just speaking, and that's where all of my money comes from. You're figuring out, am I an author? So I want to take and write a book, or my book becomes the way I can get more speaking engagements. So what Castmagic's going to allow you to do is ultimately take any audio and video recording and figure out ways to repurpose that. So how do I turn my speech from a stage and turn into handouts so that as soon as I'm done speaking, I'm able to turn to the conference or my client in this case that hired me to speak and go, hey, here's a 25-step guide basically of what I just said on stage that you can now and give to the attendees so I can offer more value to people. From a podcast standpoint, how do I turn that podcast and now allow it to let me continue to put content out there and reasons why people should hire me for whatever I'm speaking about? There's a countless number of ways. I've taken my coaching calls back to speakers aren't just speakers. We're more than just that. So if I'm coaching clients on certain things, how do I turn those coaching calls into my LinkedIn post? Doesn't matter who I'm talking to. It's about what I'm saying. So how do I take all those components and allow me to do more, whether it's a LinkedIn post, a handout, or write a book? We're speakers, so most likely we're not the best at writing, or at least for me, I like to talk more than I can write. So how do I take my words and use a tool like Castmagic to have it all written for me in my voice, in my tone, without any outside noise, because it's only the recording I gave it.
All right. Well, it's definitely a tool that if you're a speaker, you should check out. We'll make sure that down in the show notes below, we have a link there to check out Castmagic and what all it can do for you. Greg, any final words of wisdom for our listeners before we wrap up this episode?
I guess I'll go back to continue to have conversations, continue to engage with people, play the long game, right? So if your goal is, I want to be a speaker and I want to be making 3,000, then 5,000, then 10,000, it all starts from somewhere. And it all starts with just having conversations with people. So they start knowing what you care to talk about, what you want to be sharing from a stage. But it's not just sharing from a stage. It could be sharing from a book, a course. It could be allowing you all these other ways you can monetize beyond just, let me sit here on a stage and get paid for it. I think once we can shift our mind to there's more ways to make money by doing what you're already talking about, you'll make more money. You'll find more ways to build your passion for what you love talking about in the first place.
All right. Well, great advice. So, Greg, thank you so much for being my guest on this episode of the Spotlight on Speaking Show. I wish you the greatest of success in all that you do. And of course, to our listeners out there, thank you for joining us today. And as always, may this year be your greatest year yet. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
This has been the Spotlight on Speaking Show with Brett Ridgway. Be sure to join us every week as we interview speaking industry pros and have them share their best tips for building a profitable speaking business. Until next week, thank you for tuning in, and remember to visit our website at spotlightonspeaking.com so you can enjoy even more great episodes like this one. While you're here, be sure to subscribe via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Spotlight on Speaking Show. Until then, our sincere best wishes to you for the greatest of success as you work to build your own profitable speaking business.